port of Corufea in 1957, photographer Manuel Ferrell captured a father and son in tears as they said farewell to relatives boarding a boat bound for Buenos Aires, driven away by the harsh economic hardship gripping Spain. On the 10th of August 1945, just one day after the nuclear bombing of Nagasaki, photographer Yosuke Yamahata documented a young boy clutching a rice ball, the only emergency rations available, wearing a cloth hood designed to protect against air raids. Born in 1860, Fannie Mills, billed as the Ohio Bigfoot Girl, drew crowds across dime museums throughout the 1880s, her fame rooted in Milroy's disease, a rare condition that caused her lower limbs to grow to an extraordinary size. In New York in 1939, Albert Einstein posed for a photograph, alongside his sister Maria, known as Maja, capturing a quiet, personal moment between two siblings, far from the public attention that surrounded the celebrated physicist. At Santa Monica's famous Muscle Beach around 1954 12-year-old April Atkins demonstrated remarkable strength by supporting her entire family on her back, a striking image of youth and physical capability at California's celebrated outdoor fitness landmark. Near Épinay, France on the 18th of September 1918, a British Army chaplain knelt in prayer beside a dying German Army medic, a quiet act of compassion that crossed enemy lines in the final weeks of the First World War. In 1945, following the liberation of Italy, an Italian grandmother reached out to warmly welcome a United States soldier, one small human moment of relief and gratitude set against the vast backdrop of the Second World War's end. In Houston, Texas, in 1925, workers were still delivering 25-pound blocks of ice directly to homes and businesses, a daily physical labor that formed the backbone of food preservation before modern refrigeration became widely available. Puyi, the last emperor of China, was photographed in the 1920s alongside his first wife, Empress Wanrong, a formal portrait capturing the final imperial couple of a dynasty that had ruled China for over 2,000 years. Built in 1887 in Stockholm, the city's telephone tower carried approximately 5,500 telephone lines before underground cabling made it obsolete by 1913. It later bore advertising, survived until a fire in 1952 weakened its structure, and was demolished in 1953. During the Great Blizzard of 1888, one of the most severe storms in American history, an unidentified young man stood in a shoveled path on Madison Avenue and 40th Street in New York City, surrounded by snowfall that reached up to 58 inches across the northeastern United States. A 1937 photograph taken in Havana captured a group of Cuban schoolboys at leisure, an ordinary childhood scene made extraordinary in hindsight, because the boy holding a lollipop in the image would grow up to become Fidel Castro. Photographed during the Battle of the Bulge in 1945. These young German prisoners of war were captured during Germany's last major offensive of the Second World War, an operation intended to split Allied lines and force a negotiated peace in the Axis powers' favor. This farmhouse once stood in Upper Manhattan where 84th Street and Broadway now intersect, photographed in 1879 as a quiet rural structure that would soon vanish entirely beneath the expanding streets and buildings of New York City. In 1981, 17-year-old Marcus Sargent fired 6 shots toward Queen Elizabeth during a public appearance, but the monarch was unharmed as the gun contained only blanks. Sargent was swiftly arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. On the 17th of April 1982, the British aircraft carrier HMS Hermes sailed toward the Falkland Islands, its departure marking one of the most significant naval mobilizations Britain had undertaken since the end of the Second World War. August Landmesser stood with arms folded in a Hamburg shipyard in 1936, refusing to raise his hand in the Nazi salute, a man who had joined the party in 1931 seeking work, but had since fallen in love with a Jewish woman named Irma Eckler. On May 18, 1980, Richard Lasher photographed the dramatic eruption of Mount St. Helens, capturing the massive plume of ash that forced him to abandon his Pinto and escape on his motorcycle, leaving the car behind as the volcano's destruction engulfed the landscape. Emiliano Zapata Salazar rose as one of the most prominent leaders of the Mexican Revolution, a decade-long conflict from 1910 to 1920 that dismantled the Federal Army, reshaped Mexican culture and government, and claimed the lives of around 1 million people. In 1940 in Claiborne County, Tennessee, 2 barefoot children walked the road to school, their worn feet on the dirt path a quiet reflection of the hardships faced by families in rural Appalachia during the final years of the Great Depression. Soaring over American skies in 1947, the experimental YB-49 flying wing prototype represented a bold new vision for aviation, its radical tailless design challenging everything engineers had previously believed possible about powered flight. In Holland, in March 1979, Joop Sinju of Philips joined forces with Sony to introduce the compact disc to the world, forever changing how humanity would listen to, store, and share recorded music. In 1954, Marilyn Monroe stood on a stage in Korea, performing live before thousands of American troops stationed far from home during one of the most difficult conflicts of the 20th century. Outside St. Paul's Cathedral in the City of London in January 1920, a man stands calmly with pigeons perched across both arms and his shoulder, pausing his daily feeding routine long enough for this quiet, timeless portrait. On the 16th of July, 1969, Kmart employees gathered around a screen inside their store to watch humanity's most historic achievement unfold, sharing in the awe of the Apollo moon landing during an ordinary working day. Across New York City in the 1970s, everyday life unfolded against a backdrop of urban decay, financial collapse, and social tension, captured in photographs that documented the raw, unvarnished reality of depression, era streets and struggling neighborhoods. Detroit in the 1940s stands frozen in time through photographs that reveal a bustling, industrious city alive, with workers, vehicles, and the relentless energy of a nation rebuilding itself during and after the Second World War. Along the streets of Paris in the 1960s, vintage color photographs captured the elegance and spontaneity of daily French life, preserving the textures, fashions, and faces of a city at the height of its cultural influence. Somewhere in Northern California around 1920, a Briscoe automobile sits parked beside a roadside campsite, offering a rare glimpse into the early days of American automobile travel and the spirit of outdoor adventure it inspired. In Wales in the 1890s, a woman sits beside her spinning wheel with knitting in her hands, a quiet portrait of domestic craft and rural life, captured just as the industrial age began reshaping the world around her. Rolling off the production line in the former Airco factory in Collindale during the 1920s, newly assembled Chevrolet trucks represented the rapid expansion of American automotive manufacturing into the heart of British industrial life. Photographed in 1973, the 4 members of Pink Floyd stood together at a moment when the band was on the verge of releasing one of the most celebrated and enduring albums in the entire history of rock music. Inside a dormitory room at the University of Illinois in 1910, students gathered in their shared living space, offering a rare and intimate look at college life more than a century ago, long before the modern campus experience existed. Captured in 1929 inside Grand Central Station in New York City, great shafts of sunlight poured through the high windows in a scene that can never be recreated today because the buildings constructed outside have since blocked those rays entirely. In 1968, an era defined as much by its bold personal style as its political upheaval. This photograph captured the extraordinary hair fashions of the time, reflecting a generation asserting its identity through every visible means available. In 1955, workers went about the unglamorous but essential task of cleaning out the canals of Venice, pulling back the romantic curtain on a city that required constant practical labor to maintain its famous waterways and streets. In 1970, visitors to Paris could still park their vehicles directly beneath the iron arches of the Eiffel Tower, and access to one of the world's greatest landmarks that would soon disappear forever as the city changed around it. In 1977, eager fans stretched around the block in long, patient lines outside cinemas, waiting for their chance to see Star Wars, a film that would transform popular culture and the entire landscape of Hollywood filmmaking. At the Piggly Wiggly Continental Store in Encino, California, in 1962, cashiers stood at their registers inside one of America's pioneering self-service supermarket chains, part of a retail revolution that had been changing how Americans shopped for decades. Around 1918, at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, students and instructors enrolled in the Student Army Training Corps gathered for a class photograph during their course in pole climbing, training telephone electricians in vocational skills essential to the war effort. Photographed in 1988, Sylvester Stallone posed for the camera at the height of his global stardom, years into a career that had made him one of the most recognized and commercially successful actors in the history of American cinema. In 1975, football legend Pele stood with United States President Gerald Ford, patiently teaching the leader of the free world how to juggle a football, a light-hearted moment that bridged the worlds of politics and international sport. In November 1982, author Stephen King stood at the iron gates of his new Victorian-style house in Maine, the entrance decorated with bat figures, presenting a home that seemed perfectly suited to the master of American horror fiction. Photographed in 1936, the exposed and rarely seen back face of the Hoover Dam stood bare and towering before the reservoir behind it had been filled with water, revealing the full engineering scale of the structure in stark dramatic relief. In 1971, near Winganon, Oklahoma, a cement mixer truck crashed and was left behind because it was simply too heavy to move, and local residents eventually repainted it to resemble a NASA space capsule, turning an accident into a roadside landmark. From the earliest years of the 1900s through the 1930s, vintage photographs of Harley-Davidson motorcycles and the factory floors where they were built documented the rise of an American company that would become one of the most legendary brands in motorcycle history. Around July 1928, American aviation pioneer Amelia Earhart visited Chicago, Illinois, just 1 month after completing her historic first transatlantic flight from Newfoundland, Canada, to Wales, arriving as one of the most celebrated figures in the world of aviation. In 1935, the sleek racing vehicle known as Bluebird was photographed before it went on to set a new land speed record, reaching the extraordinary speed of 301.1 miles per hour and cementing its place in motorsport history. On the set of the 1982 science fiction film Blade Runner, actor Rutger Hauer was photographed in character, part of a production that would go on to be recognized as one of the most visually groundbreaking films ever made. Around 1900, a woman sat quietly near the Cliff House on the shoreline of San Francisco, her figure set against the dramatic California coastline in a photograph that preserves a solitary, unhurried moment from the very edge of a new century. Daytona Beach in Florida in 1957 was captured in photographs that preserved the particular atmosphere of a mid-century American seaside resort, where visitors gathered along the wide, famous shoreline during the height of the post-war leisure boom. In Nice, France in 1908, women carried out the laborious work of washing clothes by hand, a routine domestic task captured on camera as a quiet record of everyday working life in the early 20th century. During the filming of Ben Hur 1959, actors Charlton Heston and Stephen Boyd were photographed riding a scooter together on set, a candid and informal moment behind the scenes of one of Hollywood's most ambitious epic productions. Photographed by Leslie Jones in 1932, the crowded intersection of Washington Street and Bromfield in Boston captured the dense, busy energy of a major American city at street level during the depths of the Great Depression era. Around 1905, a Grand Trunk car ferry was photographed crossing the frozen Detroit River in winter, a striking image of the determined effort to maintain transportation and commerce across one of North America's most vital waterways throughout the harshest season. Photographed around 1890 in County Galway in Ireland, a woman sits beside her spinning wheel for a formal portrait, a quietly dignified image of rural Irish craft and daily life captured near the close of the 19th century. Posted in 1945, a billboard near the Manhattan Project sites urged workers to maintain absolute secrecy about their work, a reminder of the extraordinary security measures surrounding the most consequential and dangerous scientific program in American wartime history. In 1921, a Ford Model T chassis had been converted into a UPS delivery truck, an early example of the company's growing logistics network and the central role the Model T played in transforming American commercial transportation. In 1942 in Fort Worth, Texas, real women doing the demanding industrial work that inspired the Rosie the Riveter image were photographed on the job, documenting their vital contribution to America's wartime manufacturing effort during the Second World War. In 1904 at Ellis Island, newly arrived immigrants were photographed stepping onto American soil, joining the millions who passed through that famous gateway during one of the greatest waves of human migration in modern world history. At the turn of the 20th century in Dublin, Ireland, Engine Alley was captured on camera in a photograph that preserved the crowded, working-class character of one of the city's oldest and most densely inhabited urban streets. Photographed in an undated image, simply captioned, "Styled and proud of it," this portrait of personal style and self-expression stands as a testament to the enduring human desire to present oneself to the world with confidence and individuality. In Washington State in 1908, an old homestead was photographed standing in the landscape, a quiet record of pioneer settlement and rural life in the Pacific Northwest during the early years of the 20th century. Inside a kitchen decorated and equipped in 1920s style, a woman attended to domestic tasks in a setting that reflected the era's approach to household management, captured as an everyday scene from the daily life of the period. Photographed in London in 1964 by David Magnus, the Ronettes posed for a portrait during their visit to Britain, capturing the American vocal group at the height of their fame and influence within the international pop music world. On the 10th of April, 1914, employees of the Greenville, South Carolina Post Office gathered for a group photograph alongside their Harley-Davidson and Excelsior motorcycles, documenting the early adoption of motorized vehicles by American postal services in the years before the First World War. More than a century ago, passengers and workers moved through the tunnels and platforms of the London Underground, captured in photographs that preserve the atmosphere of one of the world's oldest and most historically significant metropolitan railway systems. Around 1912, a woman posed proudly beside a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, one of the earliest documented examples of female riders embracing the machine at a time when the American motorcycle industry itself was still in its formative years. In 1900 in Springfield, Massachusetts, Italian immigrant workers laid street pavers by hand, a photograph that documented both the physical labor that built American cities and the essential role immigrant communities played in that vast urban construction effort. Taken in 1860, a photograph described as social networking captured a group of people gathered together in conversation, an image that draws a quiet and thoughtful parallel between 19th century human connection and the digital social networks of today. In 1927, travelers took to the open roads of America in their recreational vehicle, a photograph that documented the early years of motorized road travel and the growing American appetite for freedom, mobility, and outdoor adventure. Around 1974, a student sat behind the wheel of a driver's education simulator, using the classroom training technology of the era to practice road skills in a controlled environment before taking on the responsibility of real driving. In 1927, the streets of Chicago were brought to a standstill by a traffic jam, a photograph that captured the rapid growth of automobile ownership in American cities and the infrastructure challenges that came with it in the interwar years. Captured in 1894 or 1895, a portrait of a uniquely styled individual preserved one person's extraordinary personal presentation at the close of the Victorian era, offering a small but striking window into the range of human self-expression across history. In 1969, Elvis Presley was photographed at the height of his legendary career, an enduring image of the man widely known simply as the King, whose influence on American popular music and culture remained undiminished nearly 2 decades after his rise to fame. Built between 1250 and 1500 CE by the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island, the famous stone statues known as moai are not simply heads as commonly believed, but complete figures with full bodies buried beneath the surface of the ground. In 1964, a promotional photograph of Julia Child was taken for her groundbreaking television program The French Chef, capturing the beginning of a broadcasting career that would transform American home cooking and make her one of the most beloved culinary figures of the century. In 1990, NASA unveiled the View System, a head-mounted stereoscopic display device that immersed its wearer in either a computer-generated artificial environment or a live feed relayed from remote video cameras, an early milestone in the development of virtual reality technology. On the 17th of November 1922, the last Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Vahdettin, departed Constantinople, bringing to a close more than 6 centuries of Ottoman rule and marking one of the most consequential political transformations of the modern era. In September 1940, photographer Marion Post Wolcott captured children playing marbles outside after school in Breathitt County, Kentucky, a quiet scene of rural childhood in the Appalachian Mountains during the final years of the Great Depression. In a lighthearted moment on a film set in 1979, a playful caption referencing the then-recent Star Wars universe appeared alongside an image of someone about to fall onto a pile of mattresses, blending popular culture with everyday physical comedy. In 1954, a visiting photographer from Japan captured a Detroit family in a photograph titled Factory Hand at Ford, a quiet and humanizing portrait of working-class American life in the city that had become synonymous with automobile manufacturing. In 1964, Japanese telephone operators in Tokyo were photographed using the New View phone manufactured by Toshiba Shibara Electric, a device that allowed both caller and recipient to see each other, anticipating the video calling technology that would become commonplace decades later. On the set of Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, Harrison Ford and Karen Allen were photographed together, a candid image captured during the production of the Steven Spielberg film that would become one of the most beloved adventure movies in cinema history. A 1970s concept image titled "Typist of the Future" imagined what office work might look like in the years ahead, reflecting the era's fascination with technology and the widespread belief that the workplace was on the verge of dramatic transformation. A 1921 advertisement confidently urged consumers to eat a plate of ice cream every single day, a promotional message that reflected a moment in American advertising history when health claims and indulgent products were marketed together without hesitation or irony. During the great skyscraper construction boom of the 1920s in New York City, construction workers were photographed clinging to chains while suspended in midair high above the streets below, earning themselves the dramatic nickname "Cowboys in the Sky" from a watching reporter. In 1968, crew members aboard the USS Constellation aircraft carrier took advantage of their free time by holding a picnic on the flight deck and swimming in the Gulf of Tonkin, a rare moment of leisure during service in the Vietnam War era. In 1905 in New York City, a horse-drawn street cleaning vehicle moved through the urban streets, a photograph that captured the transitional moment between animal-powered and motorized municipal services in one of the world's most rapidly modernizing cities. Decades before the chain became a global symbol of American fast food culture, customers visited McDonald's restaurants in the 1950s when the business was still in its earliest years and the Golden Arches were a relatively new sight on the American roadside. In the 1960s, a swimmable was deployed on the streets of New York City, a mobile swimming pool mounted on a vehicle that brought recreational water access directly to neighborhoods during the hot summer months as part of a city public recreation program. At a beauty school in 1940, a woman sat with her hair set in permanent wave curlers, a photograph that documented the beauty industry's training practices and the popular hairstyling techniques that defined the fashionable look of the early 1940s. Around 1900, two villagers were photographed drinking together at the Bidford Mop, an annual fair held in the village of Bidford, on Avon in the English county of Warwickshire, capturing a moment of community celebration rooted in centuries of English rural tradition. In 1974, Tom Hanks was photographed at Skyline High School in Oakland, California, in the year of his graduation, an image that preserves a youthful moment in the early life of a man who would become one of the most acclaimed actors in Hollywood history. In 1930, Kenneth Hunter performed mid-air mechanical checks on his aircraft while airborne, part of the Hunter brothers' record-breaking endurance flight that kept them aloft for 23 consecutive days through periodic aerial deliveries of food and fuel from another airplane. Sylvester Stallone was photographed in the 1980s at the height of a decade that cemented his global reputation as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, his image synonymous with the era's taste for action heroes and physical on-screen strength. Unveiled in 1966, the Toyota 2000 GT was captured in photographs that preserve the clean, sweeping lines of a Japanese sports car widely regarded as one of the most beautifully designed automobiles produced anywhere in the world during that decade. In 1914, a photograph documented mail delivery in action, preserving a record of the postal workers and vehicles that formed the everyday backbone of communications and commerce across communities at a time when the letter was still the primary means of written contact. In 1969, the flow of water over Niagara Falls was deliberately stopped by American authorities, and photographers captured the dry rock face of one of the world's most famous natural wonders in a unique image that very few people have ever seen. At the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, a young Michael Jordan was photographed competing, while wearing Converse shoes, a detail that would later become a notable historical footnote, given the shoe sponsorship deal with Nike that would follow and transform athletic footwear marketing forever.